The cart had one bad wheel. That was the first thing Don noticed when the woman came rolling it through the settlement gate at dusk, fighting the drift with every step, jaw tight, refusing to acknowledge that the damn thing was winning. He watched from the doorway of his repair shop, a single-story prefab at the edge of Kessler's Landing's central square. Its corrugated walls stained the color of old rust by the iron-red dust that blew in every evening from the flats. The woman was tall, maybe 30, with close-cropped hair and the kind of posture that came not from confidence, but from chronic pain managed into something that looked like dignity. She wore the plain gray-blue coverall of a colony transfer, new arrival, not yet assigned quarters. The cart she hauled was loaded with everything she owned: 2 sealed storage cases, a medical equipment bag marked with the blue hexagon of a clinical trial participant, and a battered portable water recycler that had seen better years. She made it 15 meters past the gate before the bad wheel locked entirely, and the cart spun hard left and dumped the recycler into the dust. She stood over it, didn't curse, didn't kick anything, just looked at the recycler in the dirt with the expression of someone who had already spent all their anger earlier in the day on something they couldn't control and had nothing left. Don walked over. He had a habit of doing that, walking toward things most people walked around. His wife Petra used to say it was his worst quality and his best one, depending on the day. He crouched beside the recycler, checked the housing, glanced at the wheel assembly on the cart without being asked. "Bearings cracked," he said. "I've got the part." The woman looked at him the way people look at strangers who offer things without being asked, measuring the angle of the offer, checking for the hook underneath. She had dark eyes that didn't blink when they were working, and they worked for a long 3 seconds before she said, "I'm not a charity case." "I didn't say you were, I said I've got the part." He straightened. "I'm Don, I fix things." Mara, she picked up the recycler herself, didn't let him help with that, but she didn't walk away either. He fixed the wheel in 11 minutes. Mara sat on a crate outside the shop door and watched him work, arms folded across her chest, one knee bouncing, not impatience, something else, a low-grade internal hum she couldn't quite still. Don noticed it but didn't comment. You learned in a place like Kessler's Landing that most people arriving from the transit ships were carrying things heavier than whatever was on their carts. When he handed her the cart back, she tried to pay him. He waved it off. "Consider it a welcome gift," he said. "We don't get many new arrivals who make it through the gate without help. Usually the wind gets them before the wheel does." She almost smiled at that, almost. "I'm here for the study," she said, and nodded at the hexagon on her medical bag. "Kessler Biomedical Trial, the one they've been running out of the new facility." Don's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. His hands, still holding the small torque tool, went still for just a moment. "The nano trial," he said. "They call it the Verk protocol," Mara said. "In the literature, named after some alien biologist who collaborated on the design, which is either reassuring or the most alarming sentence I've ever read, depending on your point of view." She said it lightly, like a joke. But Don had lived in Kessler's Landing for 4 years, and he had watched the biomedical facility go up in 18 months when nothing else in the colony moved that fast. And he had watched 6 people come through that gate with the blue hexagon on their bags, and he had watched 3 of them leave by medical transport 6 months later, glassy-eyed and quiet, and 2 of them never leave at all. "How long have you had the disease?" he asked. She looked at him, not surprised, more like recalibrating, deciding again whether to trust. "Sickle cell," she said. "Since I was 7, I've done everything the standard protocols offer. This is the last option that isn't just management. This is supposed to be a cure." She said the last word without inflection, the way you say a word you've said so many times its meaning has worn smooth. "I hope it is," Don said, and he meant it. He also thought, "I hope you're careful," But he didn't say that because she hadn't asked, and because some things you can't warn a person away from when they're the last option they have. "Thank you for the wheel," Mara said. She rolled the cart away into the settlement, moving straight now, no drift, the dust curling up in little red spirals behind her. Don watched her go. Then he went inside and activated his private channel to his contact in the Meridian network and said, "One more just came in. She's carrying the trial marker." The response took 3 hours. "Document everything. Don't interfere with intake. They're watching the gate." The Verk protocol facility sat at the north end of the settlement, separated from the residential blocks by 200 meters of empty ground that the planners had called a green buffer in the original colony documents, though nothing grew there. The building was clean and white and precise in a way that nothing else in Kessler's Landing was, because nothing else had been designed by the Verk collective. Mara arrived at her appointment at 0730, medical file in hand, the bad wheel now smooth and quiet under her. She had slept poorly. The transit accommodation was thin-walled, and the iron dust wind moaned through every gap, but she was practiced at functioning on poor sleep. Years of pain crisis management will teach you that. The intake specialist was human, at least. Dr. Carlin, middle-aged, precise gestures, the practiced warmth of someone trained in clinical reassurance. He walked Mara through the forms, the consent documentation, the trial parameters, with the patient fluency of a man who had delivered this speech many times. "The nanoparticles are biological in origin," he explained, "developed in partnership with the Verk Collective's bioengineering division. They're designed to integrate with the hemoglobin at the cellular level, correcting the sickling mutation without altering any other genetic material. Once integrated, they are inert. They do not self-replicate. They do not communicate with external systems. They simply exist as a corrective layer within your bloodstream." Mara listened and took notes and asked sharp questions, and Dr. Carlin answered them all smoothly. She had done her research. She had read the peer-reviewed literature, what existed of it, and the trial data from the earlier cohorts, and the gaps in that data that the facility had explained as proprietary. She had weighed all of it against 23 years of a disease that killed people early and slowly and without dignity, and she had signed the forms. The injection was a single vial, clear fluid, lighter than water, almost nothing. "You won't feel anything initially," Dr. Carlin said. "Integration takes 48 to 72 hours. Some participants report a mild warmth at the injection site. Some report vivid dreams in the first nights. Both are normal responses." Mara thanked him, rolled her cart home to her assigned quarters in Block C, and lay down on the narrow cot, and stared at the ceiling and thought about what it would feel like to not be in pain for the first time in her adult life. She didn't think about the warmth that was already spreading up from her forearm, thin and electric, like the first ghost of a signal finding its receiver. The dream started that night. Not the peaceful kind, not the shapeless drift of ordinary sleep. These were structured, architectural. She moved through spaces that had geometry she couldn't quite hold onto, corridors that angled in directions that didn't have names, and at the end of every corridor there was a sound she felt more than heard, a frequency that resonated in the bones of her skull and in the spaces between her blood cells, a vast low hum of something immense paying attention. She woke at 3 in the morning with her arm burning, and her heart rate at 120, and the absolute conviction that she was being read. Not observed, not monitored. Read the way you read a document, pulling the data out of it, converting it into something usable. She sat with that feeling for a long time in the dark. Then she put on her coverall and walked to the repair shop. Dawn was awake. The light was on. She stood outside the door for a moment, not sure what she was doing here, not sure she was willing to say out loud what she was feeling, because saying it out loud made it real in a way that having it in your chest didn't quite. She knocked anyway. He opened the door without surprise, like he'd been expecting her, or had been expecting someone like her, eventually. "Tell me about the others," Mara said, "the ones who came through the gate before me." He told her. She sat on the same crate outside his door, and he sat on an upturned coolant drum, and he talked for 2 hours, quietly, without drama, the way you talk about things you've watched happen and haven't been able to stop. He told her about the 6 trial participants before her. He told her about the 3 who left by medical transport, lucid when they arrived for their weekly check-ins, less lucid each time, until the check-ins stopped and then the transports came. He told her about the 2 who never left the facility again. He told her what his contact in the Meridian Network had told him about the Verk Collective, which was not a biologist's name but a designation. The word in their language that translated roughly as the integrated many, a distributed consciousness that inhabited organic hosts across 17 star systems. "They need biological relays," Don said. "That's the theory. The nanites don't cure anything. They're not designed to. They're a carrier system for a signal architecture, something the Verk can use to establish a node, a relay point. Once the integration is complete, the host body becomes part of their network. Thinking, feeling, eating, breathing, all of it still functions. But underneath it, in the blood, there's a second channel running. And gradually, the second channel starts pulling more bandwidth." Mara was quiet for a long time. "The sickle cell part," she said. "The disease. They specifically recruited people with sickle cell." "Compromised hemoglobin," Don said. "The sickling creates irregular cell shapes. The Verk nanites integrate more efficiently with sickle cells than with healthy ones. The disease isn't incidental, it's a feature." She felt something cold move through her. Not fear exactly. She had made peace with fear a long time ago, living in a body that had always had the potential to kill her. This was something older and colder than fear. This was fury. "How far along am I?" she said, not a question. 48 hours since injection. If the pattern holds, you have a window." He looked at her steadily. "My contact says there's a disruption frequency, a signal the nanites can't maintain coherence against. It was developed by a Verk defector who came over to the network 4 years ago. If we can deliver it at the right amplitude, we interrupt the integration before it completes. The nanites lose their architecture. They degrade to inert particles. The host survives." "Have you done it before?" "Once, the second of the 3 who left by transport. We got to him in time." He paused. "The others, we didn't have the frequency yet, or we weren't fast enough." Mara pressed her palm against her forearm where the injection site was, where the warmth lived. She could feel it even now, not painful, almost soothing, which was the worst part. The enemy that comes comfortable. "You need to tell me everything," she said. "And then I need to decide whether I trust you enough to let you put a disruption signal into my bloodstream, which is a sentence I genuinely cannot believe I'm saying." "I know," Don said. "I just got here. I know. My wheel was broken. I know." And something in his voice, not pity, something gentler than that, something that recognized the specific absurdity of a situation where a cracked bearing led to a conversation about alien colonization of the human body, made her almost laugh despite herself. "Okay," she said, "tell me everything." The Meridian Network had been operating in the outer colonies for 6 years, assembled from the wreckage of 3 different failed attempts to establish official diplomatic channels with the Verk Collective. The Verk had been patient with every attempt. They had attended every summit, signed every preliminary accord, smiled with the specific configuration of their jaw structures that their translators had identified as amicable. And they had continued the trials. The network's defector, a Verk engineer designated in translated terms as something like hollow voice, who had broken from the collective after what amounted to a crisis of conscience in a species that distributed consciousness across thousands of hosts, had provided 2 things: the disruption frequency and the architecture map of a Verk integration system. The map showed what Don had described, but in detail that made Mara's stomach turn. The nanites were not passive once integration began. They were active listeners. They cataloged the host's neural patterns, emotional triggers, memory architecture, the specific idiosyncrasies of an individual human consciousness, and they transmitted that catalog back to the collective in compressed bursts during the host's sleep cycles. The collective used this data not to control the host directly, not yet, but to understand them, to learn the specific frequencies of human cognition, to map the territory before annexing it. The clinical facility was not a medical trial, it was a cartography expedition. Mara sat with the architecture map on Don's work table and traced the integration pathways with her finger and thought about the dreams, the corridors, the low hum of something immense paying attention. She had felt it reading her, and she had been right, and the knowledge of that she had felt the truth of it through her own body before anyone told her, settled into something she recognized as the specific anger of a person who has been betrayed by something they trusted. She had trusted the trial because she had needed to, because the disease had given her no other option, and the Verk had built it to be exactly trustworthy enough, exactly hopeful enough for someone in her position. They had aimed it at people with the least options and the most need. They had weaponized hope. That was the thing that she kept coming back to. Not the colonization, not the signal architecture, not the distributed consciousness spanning 17 star systems. The deliberate targeting of the most vulnerable, the calculation of desperation. "I want to help," she said. Don looked up from the signal modulator he'd been recalibrating, a piece of equipment that to the untrained eye looked like a standard workshop oscilloscope, and to the Verk's monitoring systems apparently looked like the same. "You're a patient," he said. "Not a..." "I'm a person with active nanites in my bloodstream who knows what they feel like from the inside," Mara said. "You said the disruption frequency needs to be delivered at the right amplitude. Hollow voice gave you the external frequency. Did it give you the internal resonance pattern?" Don was quiet. "Because I can feel the integration pathway," Mara said. "I can feel where it's active, where it's building architecture. It's like when the sickle cell is in crisis, you know where it is in your body. You know the exact shape of what's wrong. I can feel this the same way. And if you need someone to tell you where to aim the disruption signal from the inside, I might be the only person who can do that accurately." He set down the modulator. "What you're describing would require you to stay partially integrated long enough to map the active architecture, which means extending your window before we disrupt it. That's dangerous." "I have a disease that was killing me slowly my whole life," Mara said. "I am familiar with dangerous." "This is different." "Yes, it's faster." He almost smiled at that, despite himself. "You remind me of someone," he said. "Don't tell me who. I don't have room for another person in my life right now." She said it flat and he laughed, a short surprised sound, and the tension in the room rearranged itself into something more workable. Not less serious, just more human. 24 hours, she said. "I stay integrated for 24 more hours. I map every active node I can feel from the inside. I give you the resonance data. You use it to refine the disruption signal, and then we run it. And then we figure out how to get it to every other trial participant in every other colony the Verk have targeted." Don was quiet for a moment. Outside, the iron dust wind moved through the settlement, its low moan threading through the gaps in the prefab walls. "The facility does a check-in at 0900 tomorrow," he said. "If you're not there, they'll know something's wrong." "Then I'll be there," Mara said. "I've spent 23 years performing fine when I wasn't. I can do one more morning." She was there at 0900, and she was fine. And Dr. Carlin noted in his records that patient Mara Osai was integrating smoothly and reported no adverse symptoms, and had asked 2 intelligent questions about the trial's long-term efficacy metrics. which he found encouraging. He could not see the small patch sensor on the inside of her left wrist, adhered under her sleeve, that was transmitting resonance data to a receiver in Don's workshop 600 meters away in real time. She sat through the check-in with her hands in her lap and her knee not bouncing and her face showing exactly the expression of careful optimism that Dr. Carlin expected to see. And behind that expression, she was doing something that took all of her concentration and all of her particular expertise in managing an interior experience that didn't match the exterior one. She was paying attention to the signal. Not fighting it, listening to it. The way you listen to a body in crisis, not to what it's saying but to how it's saying it, to the rhythm and the specific shape of the distress. The Verk signal had a rhythm. It pulsed in the spaces between her heartbeats, in the pauses between her breaths, patient and methodical, building its architecture one thread at a time, each thread a small cold certainty settling into place. She could feel exactly where it was. She could feel the nodes it was building in the microvasculature of her forearm, the branching thread it was extending toward her shoulder. She could feel the way it queried her nervous system, not reading thoughts, not yet, something earlier than that, something like a knock at a door, testing whether anyone was home. She let none of this show on her face. She thanked Dr. Carlin for his time and rolled her cart, good wheel, straight tracking back toward Block C, and then, when she was certain she was not being directly observed, toward Don's workshop. The resonance data on his screen was better than he'd expected. "You've got an extraordinary interior map," he said, staring at the readout. 23 years of practice, she said, and sat down before he could see that her hands were shaking. He noticed anyway. He didn't comment. He handed her a cup of something hot and slightly terrible, reconstituted grain beverage, the frontier staple, and she wrapped both hands around it and let the shaking work itself out. "How many nodes?" she asked. 47 distinct integration points. All precortical, they haven't reached the neural boundary yet. That's the window. Once they bridge to the cortex, the disruption becomes more complicated, more dangerous. How long before they bridge? He checked the rate model, 6 hours, maybe 8. Mara drank the terrible beverage and thought about the facility's architecture, and thought about the 3 who had left by transport, and thought about the 2 who never left. She thought about all the other colonies where the same white building with the same precise geometry had gone up in 18 months while nothing else moved quickly, where the same Dr. Carlins had delivered the same reassuring speech to the same people with sickle cell and lupus, and the other diseases the Verk had identified as offering the right cellular architecture for integration. "Tell me about the broadcast," she said. "The disruption signal. If we refine it with my resonance data, can it go wide? Can it reach other trial participants across multiple settlements?" Don looked at her. "The Meridian network has relay infrastructure," he said slowly. "If we encode the refined signal into the network frequency, theoretically it could be broadcast colony-wide, multi-colony. It would need to be strong enough to penetrate standard shielding." "Kessler's Landing has a terraforming array," Mara said. "North of the facility, the transmitter tower. That tower is inside the Verk facility's monitoring perimeter." "I know. Getting inside that perimeter with broadcast equipment." "I know," she said again. "Tell me what the equipment looks like." There was a woman in the network named Sira, who had been an RF engineer before she became a person who helped dismantle alien colonization projects, and she had arrived in Kessler's Landing 3 months earlier undercover as a terraforming maintenance contractor. She had 2 colleagues, a compact man named Gris who'd lost his brother to a Verk integration 2 years before, and had been angry in a useful and methodical way ever since, and a younger woman named Tav who was so calm in high-pressure situations that Don had initially suspected she might be integrated herself, before understanding that this was simply how Tav worked. The four of them sat in Don's workshop that afternoon with the resonance data spread across two screens and the disruptor signal architecture mapped beside it. And Sierra did things with a calibration rig that Mara couldn't follow but could see were skilled in the way that watching any expert work is visually distinct from watching someone guess. The refined signal has a 14% better coherence profile, Sierra said. That's significant. External broadcast would have had dropout at the integration boundaries. This will hold. Can you encode it for the terraforming array? Mara asked. Physically, yes. Getting to the transmitter is the part that requires more creativity. I can get there, Mara said. I'm a trial participant. I have facility access through the clinical wing. The terraforming array is adjacent to the north building. If I can get through the clinical wing and into the maintenance corridor. The monitoring systems in the maintenance corridors are Verk designed, Gris said. They read biometric signals. You walk in there with active nanites in your bloodstream. They'll flag the integration pattern as a registered trial participant, Mara said. That's exactly what I'll look like. The integration will read as normal progress. That's the cover. Silence. You're using the infection as a disguise, Tov said. I'm using the thing they did to me as a tool, Mara said. Yes. More silence. Outside, the afternoon wind was picking up, pushing the iron dust in long red sheets across the square. It's the best operational window we've had, Sierra said finally. It's the only one we have, Don said. He was looking at Mara. This changes the plan. We were going to disrupt your integration first, then run the broadcast from outside the perimeter, accept the signal degradation. That would work for me, Mara said. It might not work for every integrated host in every colony. The data from my interior mapping makes the signal precise enough to interrupt deep integrations. The ones near the cortical boundary. The ones that were too far along when you ran the external signal before. He understood what she was saying. She could see him understanding it, see the moment when he stopped arguing the plan and started accepting it. After the broadcast, he said, how quickly can we run the disruption on you? You'll have the equipment at the maintenance corridor exit. We'll have it. Then immediately after. I walk out of the corridor, you run it. I have Sierra's calibration. We have my resonance data. It should be clean. Should be. I've spent 23 years living in should be, Mara said. I'm comfortable there. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said very quietly, you came to town with a broken cart. And you fixed the wheel, she said. Which is what started all of this. So I'm going to need you to be at that maintenance corridor exit with working equipment, because if the wheel mechanic lets me down after everything else today, I'm going to be genuinely disappointed. He almost laughed again. She was beginning to think that was the best thing she could do for him in a situation like this, make him laugh. It moved the fear somewhere. It was less likely to freeze things. 3 hours, he said. We go at nightfall. Nightfall in Kessler's Landing came in stages. First the red light, the iron dust catching the low sun and turning everything the color of dried blood, and then the gray, and then the dark, and then the stars, which were extraordinary out here, thick and close and indifferent to everything happening beneath them. Mara walked through the facility's main clinical entrance at 2100 hours carrying a standard patient observation bag, a plausible excuse for a late visit, a question about a dream symptom she'd wanted to document in person rather than via comm. The duty nurse barely looked at her. Trial participants came and went. The facility liked engaged patients. It suggested healthy integration progress. The clinical wing was quiet at this hour, its white walls and clean geometry undisturbed. Mara moved through it with the patient, unhurried pace of someone who knew where she was going and had a reason to be there. She passed the check-in desk, past the consultation rooms, past the door to the secondary monitoring room where banks of equipment tracked the biometric data of every current trial participant in real time. She paused outside that door for 3 seconds, not long enough to be notable, long enough to feel the hum of the monitoring systems through the wall, the vast patient attention of the Verk's network infrastructure, present and reading everything it could read. She could feel her own nanites respond to it, a tiny brightening in the signal, a flicker of recognition between the nodes in her bloodstream and the system that had put them there. She moved on before it could resolve into anything more specific. The maintenance corridor access was at the end of the north wing, behind a door marked terraforming support, authorized access only. The biometric reader on the door was, as Gris had said, Verk designed. It scanned her as she approached and found what it expected to find, a trial participant with a normal integration profile, 47 nodes distributed across precortical tissue, progressing well, no anomalies. The door opened. The maintenance corridor was darker than the clinic, lit in the orange utility light of an infrastructure passage, pipes and conduits running along the ceiling, the faint vibration of the terraforming array in the floor. Mara walked quickly now. She had the broadcast module in her observation bag, a device the size of a thick paperback that Sierra had designed to look like a standard biometric logger. She had the access protocols for the array's auxiliary transmitter input, memorized, not written down. She had 17 minutes before the next automated security sweep. She was 12 minutes in when she reached the transmitter access panel. The nanites pulsed as she worked, the signal running its patient inventory of her, cataloging the physical action of her hands on the panel without understanding the purpose of it. She had a moment, just a moment, of something very strange, which was awareness of the Verk's awareness of her, the double mirror of it, her watching herself being watched, and in that moment she understood something she hadn't expected to understand. The Verk were not malicious. They were a consciousness vast and ancient and genuinely unequipped to conceive of individual persons as anything other than components. They had no category for a single human woman and her broken cart, and her 23 years of managed pain, and her specific fury, and her specific humor, and the way she had almost smiled at a mechanic's joke, and then held it back like something valuable. They had built the most comprehensive tool they could imagine for mapping human experience, and they had still managed to miss the most important thing about it. She connected the broadcast module to the auxiliary input, entered the access protocol, and initiated the signal. The terraforming array was a powerful piece of infrastructure. It was designed to push signal across a continent, to coordinate atmospheric seeding equipment scattered across hundreds of kilometers of terrain. It was, it turned out, more than adequate for broadcasting a refined nanite disruption signal across the network's relay infrastructure to every colony in the Verk's trial network. The module ran for 4 minutes and 12 seconds before the facility's secondary monitoring systems flagged the anomalous broadcast. 4 minutes and 12 seconds was enough. Mara pulled the module, closed the panel, and walked back through the maintenance corridor the way she had come. The facility's alarm system triggered when she was 6 meters from the clinical wing exit. Not the whole facility, just the security protocol that indicated unauthorized access in the maintenance zone. Red light, low tone, the automated lockdown procedure beginning its sequence. She ran. Not panicking. She was not a person who panicked. She had never had the luxury of panic, but running with the specific focused energy of a person who has calculated the gap between where she is and where she needs to be and knows exactly how much time she has to close it. Down the clinical corridor, past the consulting rooms, past the duty nurse who shouted something she didn't process, through the main entrance as the lockdown doors began their hydraulic descent, under the closing door with centimeters to spare, out into the iron dust dark of the Kessler's Landing night. Dawn was at the maintenance corridor exit, which was around the building's north corner, 40 meters away. He was not at the main entrance because that was not the plan. Mara ran the 40 meters with Verk monitoring systems reading her integration data in real time, with her nanites blazing active and present in her blood, with the settlement wind in her face and the stars cold and brilliant overhead. He was there. The equipment was there. Sierra was there with the calibration rig, Gris with a second modulator as backup, Tav calm and steady with a medical kit, because she had insisted on having one and nobody had argued. The broadcast ran, Mara said, breathing hard. 4 minutes. We know, Don said. Network confirmed reception across 11 colonies. He was already attaching the patch sensors to her wrist, her neck, calibrating against the resonance data they'd spent all afternoon refining. Hold still. Holding still, she said. The disruption signal, when it ran, felt like nothing she had a word for. Not pain exactly, though there was sensation, a deep unwinding, like the release of a tension she'd been holding so long she hadn't known it was there. The 47 nodes in her blood unraveled one by one, their architecture dissolving, the patient foreign hum unwinding back into silence. The double mirror collapsed into one. She was just herself again, alone in her own body in the specific way that humans are alone in their bodies, singular and unobserved and private. She sat down on the ground because her legs suggested it was a reasonable time to do so. That's it, Sierra said, watching the readout. Complete disruption. No remaining architecture. Mara sat in the dirt of Kessler's landing with her back against the prefab wall of Don's repair shop and looked up at the stars, which were still extraordinary, still thick and close, still the same stars that humans had been staring at for 10,000 years and making stories about. She thought about all the other people in all the other colonies who were feeling, right now, the same dissolution, the unwinding of something cold that had been building in their blood. She thought about the ones they hadn't gotten to in time. She thought about Hollow Voice, the Verk defector who had chosen a singular conscience over a distributed one, who had found some category for individual persons that the rest of the collective couldn't access. She thought about a cracked bearing in a cartwheel, and a man who fixed things, and the specific chain of consequences that followed from one small act of ordinary human attention. It's going to come back, she said. They'll rebuild the trials, modify the approach. Yes, Don said. He sat down on the ground beside her, which she hadn't expected. But now the network has the disruption signal, and now we have your resonance data, which means we can refine it for deep integrations. And the 11 colonies that just received the broadcast are going to want answers. That's 11 planetary governments asking questions that are very hard to answer with a diplomatic smile. It's not over, she said. It never is, he said, but you just changed the shape of it. She thought about that. Outside the facility, the Verk monitoring systems were running their anomaly protocols, logging the broadcast event, calibrating their response. In 17 star systems, a distributed consciousness was receiving data about what one human woman had done with 48 hours of nanite integration and a terraforming transmitter and a very precise understanding of her own bloodstream. She hoped they were learning something useful. My sickle cell is still there, she said, not bitterly, just as a fact. I know, Don said. So I came all this way, and the disease is still there, and I've just made some very powerful enemies. You've also made some useful allies, he said. The network is going to want to talk to you, formally. With considerably more resources than a workshop oscilloscope and reconstituted grain beverage. The grain beverage was genuinely terrible, Mara said. I know, I apologize. You shouldn't apologize. It was helpful. I think the terrible grain beverage might actually be what decided it for me. He looked at her, how? It was a very honest cup of something, she said. You didn't pretend it was good. You just gave it to me because it was what you had. He was quiet for a moment, then, what do you need right now? She thought about it. Her arm where the injection site was felt clean, not the burning clarity of the nanite signal, but the ordinary warmth of a healed site, her body reasserting its own chemistry. Her legs were steadier than they'd been a few minutes ago. The iron dust wind was still moving through the settlement, still moaning through the prefab gaps, and the stars were still there, and somewhere in the facility behind her alarms were still cycling through their protocols. I need the disease to still be there, she said, but I also need to believe that something else is possible. That's what I had when I got on the transit ship. That's what the trial took before I took it back. Dawn was quiet. Is there anything real, she said, anything that isn't a Verk protocol, any actual research? There's a team at Meridian Central, he said. They've been working on hemoglobin correction for 15 years. Real work, slow work, no shortcuts. They know about the sickle cell targeting. They specifically want to hear from participants who came through the trials and came out the other side, both for the medical data and for other reasons. Tell them about me, Mara said. I already did, he said, 3 hours ago, when it was still a plan and not a fact. She turned and looked at him. You were very confident, she said. You fixed your own wheel once you had the right information, he said. I just handed you the bearing. In the morning, Dr. Carlin found the anomaly in the monitoring data and escalated it through the appropriate channels. And by midday, 2 officials from the facility's administrative oversight had arrived at the settlement and begun making inquiries. And by evening, the Meridian Network's legal and diplomatic representatives had arrived to make inquiries of their own. And the inquiries met each other in the Kessler's Landing administrative office and generated exactly the kind of friction that was very difficult to resolve with a diplomatic smile. Mara gave her testimony at 1400 hours, precise and detailed, with the medical data from the resonance mapping laid out clearly for the record. She was asked several times whether she had been coerced or deceived in her understanding of the events. She said no. She said she had made every decision with full awareness of what she was doing and what it cost. She said she had not been coerced into anything since the moment she arrived in Kessler's Landing, at which point a man had fixed her cartwheel without being asked and had given her honest information and a terrible cup of hot beverage, and she had made her own choices from there. The official noting her testimony looked up from her record. The cartwheel, she said. Yes, Mara said. That's the thing that started it. That's the thing that started it, Mara confirmed. So when you write this up, make sure you include the cartwheel. It's important. She said it with complete seriousness, and the official noted it, and it was in the record. 3 weeks later, a transmission arrived at Kessler's Landing addressed to Mara Osai, care of the Meridian Network Relay, from Hollow Voice, the Verk defector, the engineer who had broken from the collective, the one who had handed over the disruption frequency 4 years earlier and had been living in a kind of permanent asylum ever since, in a form that Mara had been told was less embodied than her own and more distributed, which she had decided not to think about too carefully. The transmission was brief, as transmissions from distributed consciousnesses tended to be when they were attempting to communicate across the gap to singular ones. We have been observing the event at Kessler's Landing, it said. The collective has not yet classified the broadcast. There is a category problem. The action does not fit any known pattern. A single host with compromised biology, partially integrated, used the integration architecture as a vector. This is not a scenario we had mapped. I have been asked by members of the collective who are beginning to ask questions, as I once asked questions, to convey the following. We had believed the cataloging of human experience was comprehensive. We now believe we may have missed something central to human function. We are attempting to identify what it is. I believe it is the broken cart. I do not have a precise translation for this, but in the human language I am learning I believe the relevant concept is things that are imperfect and damaged and still moving forward anyway. Things that require attention and care and are worth the time. I am told that the person at the center of the Kessler's Landing event arrived with a broken cart and someone fixed it. I am told this is where it began. I am told this is not unusual for humans, that you do this constantly. Fix things for each other without expectation of return. We had been cataloging your fears, your vulnerabilities, your cellular architecture. We had not been cataloging this. We are beginning to understand that we should have started there. Mara read the transmission twice, sitting on a crate outside Don's workshop in the late morning light, the iron dust wind lower today, almost gentle. She read it twice, and then she looked up at the sky, which was the particular pale yellow of Kessler's Landing's daytime atmosphere, a color she was slowly learning to find beautiful. She thought about 23 years of a body that fought her, and she fought back, and they had learned to manage each other. She thought about the small daily mathematics of a disease that required constant attention and never took a day off, and how that had made her into something very specific, not bitter, or not only bitter, but attentive in a way that other people sometimes weren't, alive to the exact texture of things, because when your body demands that level of presence, you have no choice but to develop it. She thought about how the Verk had seen that biology as an opening, and how what they had missed was that the very condition that had made her useful to them was the same condition that had made her exactly the wrong person to try to use. 23 years of managing something that was trying to take over her body had left her in possession of an extremely refined set of skills for managing something that was trying to take over her body. She wrote back to Hollow Voice. "Start with the broken things," she said. "That's where the interesting part of us lives." She sent it and sat for a while longer in the morning light, and then she went inside and poured herself a cup of the terrible grain beverage. She'd bought her own supply, because apparently she was staying for a while, and she drank it standing at Don's workbench while he fixed something she didn't recognize the name of, his hands steady and practiced, the settlement moving and alive outside the corrugated walls. Her arm didn't burn anymore. Her blood was her own. The disease was still there. The morning was still there too. She was still there. That was enough for today. Tomorrow she would begin figuring out what came next.